All right, welcome everyone. My name is Carson McPherson-Kretzky, and I'm a research associate at the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I'm so happy to welcome you to the Making Mitigation Work webinar series, which is hosted by the Natural Hazard Center and made possible with support from the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the National Science Foundation. This webinar series was launched in 2019 and highlights recent progress in mitigation policy, practice, and research. And today's webinar is actually the second in a special series that focuses on providing place-based hazard mitigation to underserved communities. This special series is made possible by collaboration with the National Hazard Mitigation Association. We'll have an introduction by them in a moment. I do have a few announcements before we start our webinar presentation. The webinar is being recorded, and the caption, video recording, and presentation slides from the webinar will be posted online at the Natural Hazard Center website at hazards.colorado.edu. This is also where you can find recordings and supplemental material from the prior Making Mitigation Work webinars, as well as gain access to many other free resources. So please do check that out after the meeting today, and Katie is adding the link in the chat as well. In a few moments, I will turn the controls over to our speaker, but if at any point during the presentation you have questions or comments, please do submit those using the chat function or the Q&A box as shown in this picture here, and we will bring those up at the end during the question and answer session. Let's see. All right, and also thank you to partnerships with the International Association of Emergency Managers. Attending this webinar makes you eligible to receive 1 contact hour of emergency management training through IAEM. But in order to receive that credit, you are required to attend the entire webinar session today. If you fulfill this requirement, you can please email Katie Murphy at hazardcenter@colorado.edu to request your certificate. You can also visit the Making Mitigation Work webpage under the Trainings tab at hazards.colorado.edu for more information. Now, before I introduce the speaker, I would like to turn it over to Ed Hecker from the National Hazard Mitigation Association, who will say a few words about how NHMA is supporting this series. So take it away, Ed.
Great. Thank you, Carson, and to everybody, depending on where you sit for this webinar. But just a quick, the National Hazard Mitigation Association. I serve as the Director of Operations for that association, which is a 501(c) nonprofit organization focused on nationwide improvement of hazard mitigation practice and training. As part of that, we serve as a cooperating technical partner with FEMA Headquarters Risk Map program. And under that program, we have grants to improve hazard mitigation practitioner training, and particularly focus on the community level, improving hazard mitigation planning and practice. So as part of that, we have been cooperating and partnering with universities, particularly obviously University of Colorado at Boulder and the NHC, as well as for this particular webinar, we've been collaborating with the University of Oklahoma SCIP program that is going to address research to practice in terms of improving hazard mitigation planning and practice at the underserved, under-resourced community level. So with that, I'll conclude our introduction to NHMA and turn it over to back to Carson to introduce our main speaker.
Thank you so much, Ed, and we're so grateful for the partnership with NHMA over the years and for supporting this webinar, so that's wonderful. Now I'm excited to introduce the webinar, which is titled Strengthening Hazard Mitigation in Under-Resourced Communities. Today we will be hearing from Rachel Riley, who will be discussing how she and her team have been working with low-capacity communities to develop tools and resources with long-term hazard mitigation planning. Since 2022, they've been working with communities in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas on the project that she's going to be talking about today, and she will dive specifically into how they've approached working with these communities, identifying some of the barriers that they face in long-term planning, and then exploring how they've been addressing them. Though this work is ongoing, Rachel's going to share some of the preliminary findings and next steps, and she's also joined here today from some of the community partners who will be able to field some of the questions later on in the Q&A, and also perhaps in the chat during the webinar. So please join me in welcoming Rachel Riley to today's Making Mitigation Work webinar. Rachel is the director of the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program at the University of Oklahoma. She has over a decade of experience in co-producing useful and usable research and information that helps communities and states in South Central US better plan for and respond to climate change related challenges. Ms. Riley's expertise in climate adaptation and hazard mitigation planning, communication, decision support tool evaluation, and social science methodologies. She has a background in meteorology and a master's degree in interdisciplinary studies from the University of Oklahoma. So now I'm excited to turn it over to you, Rachel, to begin the conversation. And as a reminder to the audience, please feel free to add questions in the chat or the Q&A box during the presentation, and we'll get to those at the end. So I will stop sharing, Rachel, and we will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I might have hit the button too soon here. Let's see, there we go. All right, thank you for the opportunity to speak today about strengthening hazard mitigation in under-resourced communities. And I want to first start by just giving a brief introduction to my organization for those who aren't familiar. I work for the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program, and we are one of several NOAA climate adaptation partnership teams across the country, formerly known as RISA. The SCIP region includes 4 states that you see on the screen, which are also involved in the study I'll be talking about today. We're led at the University of Oklahoma, but partnering closely with Louisiana State University, Texas Sea Grant, and Adaptation International. And in our current grant phase, we have 4 themes, and those include climate-informed planning, developing governance and collaborative capacity, extreme events in a changing climate, and climate justice. And altogether, these things work together with the aim of building long-term resilience to climate impacts in the region. Now, before I get into the weeds about the current project that we're working on with NHMA, I want to give a little bit of background about some of the work that SCIP has done over the years and some other literature that has kind of led us to where we are today. First, in the early 2010s, I and some colleagues at Louisiana State University conducted needs assessments related to climate information. And these were pretty broad, and we interviewed people in different sectors. My study was focused on Oklahoma, and theirs was focused on coastal Louisiana and Texas. And it was more about understanding what climate information is relevant to the different sectors and how do we make climate information more accessible and usable. And one of the kind of main but very simple findings that came out of the study was understanding the maximum planning timescales of different sectors. And for most of the sectors in which we were interviewed, the planning timescales were 15 years or less, which was a lot shorter than we thought. And so that had implications as we move forward over the years and how we approach our work. Some other work that's relevant to this conversation started, or I guess was including 2017, 2018 time period, where we held some workshops in Oklahoma and Arkansas, where the initial purpose was to get emergency managers and city and regional planners in the room together to help them get to know one another and learn about their complementary strengths. And through the conversations we had at those workshops came the idea and really identified the need for some kind of tool that would help point these emergency managers and planners and related officials to weather and climate data tools that they can use in their planning. And through additional workshops, we developed what became our simple planning tool for climate hazards. Initially, we developed a version for Oklahoma and one for Arkansas, so they were tailored to the state level. And the image you see on the screen is one sample of what the original version looks like, which is a PDF that pointed users to a bunch of different data tools. This one example is showing winter storm related tools. And then also a future trend summary that was tailored to the state and explained how climate change, if there'd been a trend in that hazard, and then how climate change is projected to impact that hazard if known scientifically. And I'm going to talk about this tool a little bit at the end because we have a recent update that I want to share with you all. So in addition to kind of the, making climate information more accessible to various sectors and stakeholder groups, we also, we're kind of digging deeper into understanding the rural context a bit more and what was going on in rural contexts as it pertains to hazard mitigation. So we had an opportunity through some additional grant funding to work with a rural county in Oklahoma and help them through, this was actually led by my colleague Darian Bertrand, helped them develop an updated hazard risk assessment, and then had some additional conversations with them and others across the state of Oklahoma in understanding the rural context and their needs and barriers as it pertains to hazard mitigation. And then I was also involved in a formal study with colleagues at University of Kansas, namely Ward Lyles and Penn Pennell, where we conducted a case study with 6 different medium-sized cities in the region and looked at their kind of state of hazard planning in those cities. And although the findings of this study weren't necessarily anything super surprising, it was important because we focus on inland communities, and a lot of the related studies have been focused on coastal areas that have a longer history of planning, or large cities that have just many more resources. So through this process over the years and different, I've been involved in different projects, different research, we've identified many different barriers that kind of inhibit hazard mitigation planning and other climate-related planning across the region. And my next few slides will talk about some of those barriers, and some of these have been identified by skip work, and then there's also been at times other literature that has found these barriers as well. So one of the big barriers to hazard mitigation planning and climate planning is that immediate local priorities often trump long-term risk reduction, and it can be difficult for emergency managers and planners to obtain buy-in from the city and county officials who have decision-making power. Prater and Lindell found this over 2 decades ago, and this has come up again in some workshops we held in West Texas several years ago, and also Oklahoma virtual workshops. Another barrier is that the inconsistent application and complexity of FEMA requirements across the different regions of the country and states can make the application, various, grant application and planning process very difficult for some locals. And this has been identified in a publication that FEMA put out in 2020. We've also found this to be true in some skip work as well. Another barrier is that the hazard mitigation planning process and interpretation of the plan requirements is prohibitive for many communities due to limited capacity, specifically their time and expertise. Sigler 2007 found this in looking at flooding after Hurricane Katrina. Headwaters Economics has identified this barrier as well, especially within the context of the FEMA brick competition. And then Smith and Vila have found this as well in the context of hazard mitigation assistance and state hazard mitigation officer context. And then another barrier is that many hazard mitigation plans are of mediocre quality, and many jurisdictions across the country just still don't have a plan or let their plans expire. And this is found in Burke et al. In 2012. We kind of refound this finding in the Lyles et al. Paper that was published late last year. And then it also is borne out in the FEMA local hazard mitigation plan status map, which I'll show in a moment. So altogether, there's a lot of different barriers at play, and basically, my conclusion is over all these years has been that long-term disaster risk reduction is complex and complicated. There's a lot of pieces that go into it. It's interdisciplinary and technical, which if you're a area that doesn't have that much technical expertise in a certain, field, that can be difficult to get the information you need. There's many sources of funding involved to actually be able to get plans written and then, implement projects to solve the challenges at hand. There's competing priorities at local levels. From a public opinion standpoint, kind of public awareness, hazard mitigation and long-term disaster risk reduction is usually not exciting. Oftentimes taxpayers are going to want to focus on something else that might be more exciting, and they don't really understand, why hazard mitigation is important. Often political will is needed to get it done. It can be difficult for low capacity communities to compete for grant funding because of the cost benefit analysis equations at times, depending on which funding source you're going after. Public support is often needed, and there's high turnover in local government. And so oftentimes what will happen is somebody, kind of works their way through the ranks and gets trained up in hazard mitigation and understands all these different complex grant processes and requirements, and then they'll leave for a different position, whether it's a different public sector position or to the private sector. And so in local government, you're often having to constantly rebuild that knowledge and expertise, which can slow things down. So a lot of these reasons, and there's probably more, lead to what, and I think are behind what this map shows. This is from September of last year, so it's a little bit outdated, but it's the local hazard mitigation plan status map that FEMA puts out. The yellow are expired plans and gray are no approved plans. And you can see that in Region 6, which is where I'm located and where is relevant to the study that I'm working on with NHMA, there's a lot of expired plans. And somebody who might just be looking at this initially might say, well, geez, aren't they, what are they doing? Why aren't they planning? But the barriers I just mentioned, among others, there's a lot of reasons behind why this map is showing a lot of expired plans or no approved plans. So that all leads me into the project that I've been working on with NHMA. And I'm the lead on this project, but I work closely with Darian Bertrand, who's also at SCIP, and Ed Hecker, Annie Vest, and Elena Martinez, associated with NHMA, have played a really critical advisory capacity and kind of providing the practitioner grounding for the study. So it's been great. And we also have FEMA Region 6 representation, aware and supportive of this study. And so our official title for the research is Building Capacity for Hazard Mitigation Planning in Low Capacity Communities. And the kind of overarching, lay level purpose is to determine how to make the hazard mitigation planning process more meaningful and effective as a means to then help build capacity. In this study, we had varying criteria for what we considered low capacity, and we used this during the participant recruitment process. So we said that low capacity could be you may be lacking expertise to apply for and or manage a federal grant, lacking some kind of technical expertise such as engineering, GIS, natural hazards knowledge, lacking some other kind of resources, or lacking public and political support. We have 4 research questions. The first is, why are most low capacity communities unable to address their existing hazard-related challenges? And this one has a star by it because, as you just saw in the barriers that I mentioned, there is a lot of literature that speaks to this question, but some of the literature is based on kind of informal engagement or anecdotal evidence. And so we wanted to include it in this study to be able to have a formal research component that sheds light on the barriers. The second research question is looking at what additional capacities and capabilities are needed so communities can address the challenges that are being or will be exacerbated by climate change. So bringing in the climate change element, especially as FEMA local hazard mitigation plans now require that communities account for climate change. The third question relates to hazard mitigation planning template and understanding how it should be designed so it better aligns with low capacity community capabilities and capacities, and then also advancing climate resilience more broadly than just, the hazard mitigation plan itself. And for this question, we use the FEMA Region 6 hazard mitigation planning template as a starting point. And then the final question relates to understanding some gaps that could, like training gaps that could be addressed by NHMA's disaster risk reduction ambassador curriculum or other applicable training curriculums. So here's a quick snapshot of the research timeline. We started scoping things in January 2022. It took a while to get things off the ground, but we've had to obtain some buy-in from FEMA Region 6 and give them some input. And then in spring 2023, we recruited participants for the to be involved in the focus groups. In total, there will be 4 rounds of focus groups, 3 of which are virtual and 1 is in person. And in a moment, I'll show you kind of what we've done so far. And of course, involved in this process also was obtaining approval from the University of Oklahoma Institutional Review Board. We use propulsive sampling to recruit participants. So we're mainly targeting decision makers who work in or with low capacity jurisdictions as it pertains to hazard planning. We organized the participants into state-based focus groups, or we also call them cohorts. Most of the data collection involves the focus group format, but there's been a couple online surveys as well. And important to this process has been co-production. And so I had the initial and the first 2 rounds of the focus group methodology and questions were pretty set. I then used what came out of those first 2 rounds to inform the 3rd and 4th round of focus groups as time went on. And then for data analysis, mostly qualitative analysis, but a little bit of descriptive statistical analysis of the survey data. So to date, we have 31 people who have enrolled in the study and have participated in at least 1 focus group session. And I say at least 1 because you may remember I mentioned the high turnover rate is one of the barriers, and that already happened with this study. We had a couple of people already who started and participated in focus group 1 and then ended up changing positions and had to drop out. And then also along the way, we picked up a couple of new people as well. So on the right, you can see the number of participants that correspond to each state. 28 of them work in public sector jobs, and then 3 work in private sector jobs. And then in total, they cover about 160 jurisdictions across the 4 states. Several of the participants work for kind of regional planning organizations. So that go beyond, just a single jurisdiction. The first round of focus groups, which was virtual, occurred in May 2023. The second round was also virtual. It occurred in August 2023. That one, we did have actual questions, but there are also a couple of surveys that I administered during the focus group that they filled out while I had a captive audience. And then the third round was just completed, except for I have 1 more cohort to conduct. The third round was in person, and we covered 3 main topics. One was the planning template, which was kind of always a plan. And then because of what was brought up in rounds 1 and 2, we also focused on a mitigation action database and how to improve messaging and awareness related to hazard mitigation and climate change. So in total, there were 19 questions that were asked during those focus groups. The next few slides, I'll be talking about some preliminary findings. And as I think Carson said early on, this study is still in progress, as you know, and these findings are still preliminary. I have not completed all the data analysis yet, but I do have quite a bit of data though. So today I'll just be talking about some of the highlights. So the first research question, which is at the top of the slide here, why are most low capacity communities unable to exist there or unable to address their existing hazard related challenges? There's the bullet list below that you see that aligns with a lot of the existing literature, but also some new elements. So lack of buy-in from county commissioners and other jurisdictional leaders, lack of knowledgeable staff within not only the public sector jobs, but also even within private firms is also an issue at times. Staff turnover, frequent changes to federal planning requirements. And one person said it's like pulling teeth to get people involved. So maybe, they and their jurisdiction care about this, but when it comes time to involving more people within their jurisdiction or their community, it's hard to get other people interested. So this quote from a study participant was informative, which says, and kind of speaks to an issue here, which says, you think you qualify for a certain grant and spend a lot of time working on it, and then you're told you don't meet the qualifications. That quote is reflective of a lot of what I heard of, the participants spend a lot of time trying to get the hazard mitigation plan completed, for example, but then they aren't often successful at obtaining additional grant funding to complete the projects. And so over time, they just kind of get bogged down and it's hard to have motivation to keep trying. The second research question has to do with additional capacities and capabilities are needed to be able to address climate change. And this one I haven't fully been able to dig into yet, but initially what has come out from initial conversations is that for some of the participants, not all, but for some, the topic of climate change is overwhelming and can be difficult to navigate locally, especially if there's political implications or people are just too tied into the politics and aren't able to focus on the science. And then also knowledge about how to address climate change at practical levels at the local level is lacking. And this was a quote from one study participant who said, I'm just a grant writer. I'm not a hazard mitigation expert. I'm sure not an expert in climate change. And this is really indicative of kind of the hazard planning context in rural areas where oftentimes somebody, their job is to help, write grant applications and secure additional grant funding for their community. And they may not have the needed technical expertise to be able to kind of fill in some of the technical gaps that are needed. The third research question has to do with the developing and improving on existing hazard mitigation planning templates. So for this region, Region 6, we started by using kind of as a conversational starting point, using what FEMA Region 6 already has. And I have the screenshots on the slide here you can see, which is basically a very short template that references other, the FEMA Plan Review Guide and the Local Mitigation Planning Handbook, and kind of points users to different pages and those other resources that try to help fill in their hazard mitigation plan. So I used this. I had an initial survey and additional focus group questions, and I want to share a couple of brief results related to the template. So first, I asked the participants if they had ever used the template that is available from Region 6, and about half of those that responded had not ever used it, and then another big chunk were not sure if they'd ever used it. So this is kind of indicative of, at least for the sample that we had here in this study, not many had actually used the template. And then I asked them there's kind of 3 overarching sections within the hazard mitigation plan. There's the planning process section, the risk assessment section, and the mitigation strategy section. So I want to get a sense of which one of those overarching sections is most difficult to answer. The most common response was the mitigation strategy section, which ties into some other findings of participants having a difficult time knowing what mitigation projects would qualify for the various grant applications that they apply for. Another question asked about general perceptions of the template. And so this slide is showing the mean rating for the statements that are on the left, which talk about the instructions and notes in the document sufficiently explain the plan requirements. The content is easy to understand, and the document is organized in a useful way. And 1 was strongly disagree, and 5 was strongly agree. So you can see that the mean ratings were all kind of between 3 and 4, which meant, okay, there's some utility to this template, but definitely room for improvement. So within this, the context of the 3rd research question, which relates to the template and the process, some of the specific ideas that came up for how the existing Region 6 template could be improved included, first of all, there's a new updated FEMA handbook that it needs to be updated to reflect. Also adding hyperlinks to definitions and hazard data and other types of data. Linking to successful mitigation examples, so communities can see what has worked in other parts of the country, and especially maybe ones that look like them or maybe not as big. And then also clarity on some of the hazard mitigation planning requirements, both prior requirements and also new climate change related requirements. Then research question 4 has to deal with basically training opportunities and what capability and capacity gaps exist that could be addressed by training curriculums. And with this last round of focus groups, we got into this training question a little bit, and we didn't get into the specifics, but some of the main kind of comments were that they said that FEMA puts out a lot of resources and administers some trainings, but most of the time these resources are too broad for what the participants really need. Some of the format ideas included that it would be great to have some kind of in-person training for somebody who's going through the process for the first time, but subsequent trainings could be virtual formats. There were some suggestions for, if you did have a virtual format, that you could have kind of short duration pre-recorded videos that you could watch, but you wouldn't have to be sitting, in front of a screen for 8 hours straight or something like that. Another idea was to utilize relevant state conferences and meetings, such as floodplain management conferences, emergency management conferences, municipal leagues, and all those to be able to offer the in-person trainings. And I have a couple of relevant quotes to the training piece, and one person who was relatively new to hazard mitigation planning said, "Am I alone in feeling like there's no good training on this?" So that was pretty telling. And then another person said, "I've always felt like Region 6 has a real disconnect with rural areas." So all that said, again, I have a ton of data, more data analysis to do, and one more virtual focus group to administer. But here are a few highlights that I wanted to share today and some kind of high-level preliminary conclusions for the under-resourced and low-capacity context. The first point is that the existing FEMA Region 6 hazard mitigation planning template is okay, but could be much better. And through this project, we will be recommending improvements. Also, capacity and expertise limitations are very real, and we have several ideas for how capacity could be built. One of those big ones is what I'm calling right now is action database, and maybe call something later on. But basically, a library or portfolio of what mitigation actions, and you could broaden it to be other resilience actions as well, that qualify and meet the various FEMA constraints. So I've learned from participants in this study and other studies that there are very specific requirements often for certain grant applications of what can qualify as an action. And so just more guidance is needed on what's even possible, how much does it cost, has a more rural area done it, or is it something that only is really possible in a larger city? Another need is a public relations campaign of sorts. I'm using campaign loosely here, but really to understand and help a broader decision maker network and even the public better understand hazard mitigation, what it is, why it's important. I've heard from other participants that just a lot of the people they interact with at their local levels don't even understand what hazard mitigation is or have a very limited understanding. And then related to that is a need for another PR campaign also about climate change impacts, but tailoring it to a somewhat localized, like maybe a state level, because people, they maybe understand that climate change is happening and they kind of get what's going on, but in terms of what it means for their local area, there's a lot of lacking knowledge about that. So bite-sized information is needed, and also to be able to address climate change more broadly within local communities. There really is a need for increased sophistication of the workforce, and then increased collaboration amongst city, county, and parish departments. And then last but not least, training is absolutely needed. As I mentioned previously, there's some training that exists and there's a lot of resources, but it's often too broad. And if somebody hasn't worked in hazard planning before or has very limited knowledge, they need some more specific training to help them get started and be successful. As I mentioned, I have one more round of focus groups to conduct, and those will be virtual. And then I am hoping to wrap this project up by the end of the calendar year. So stay tuned for final products and recommendations. And before I close out, and we'll have plenty of time for questions with our local participants who are also on today, I want to briefly mention and raise awareness of our simple planning tools for climate hazards. Now, as I mentioned early on in this presentation, we started off producing this for Oklahoma and Arkansas, and then we expanded to produce one for Louisiana and Texas, which covers the SCIP region. They started off as a PDF, but very recently, within the last week, actually, we released a fully online version that is available on our website. And I have a screenshot here on the right that kind of gives you, this is the Texas version. But basically what it is it's organized by hazard and points users to climate data tools that exist for each hazard. It's mainly focused on historical data, but there are climate change trend summary for each of the hazards that's tailored to the state level. Now, if you're on today and you're not from one of the 4 states that are listed on the screen, you may still be interested in checking this out, because a lot of the individual tools that are linked are relevant or available for the entire country, or subsets, regions, or like sometimes east. That's often east of the Rockies and whatnot. So even if you're not from one of these 4 states, there might be this tool might still have some utility for you. And then another resource that we're going to be expanding on and improving, but was developed out of a need that arose during a couple years ago, was our hazard mitigation benefits document to help start the conversation and kind of that PR campaign I talked about raising awareness of hazard mitigation and why it's important. This document we have a version for Oklahoma, and we're going to produce one for the other states in our region. And we also received some additional feedback on this during the third round of focus groups, so we're gonna improve it a bit from what is currently on the website. But that is also available just at the starting conversational point. So with that, I thank you all for attending today. And I want to call out real quick, I can answer questions, but I also want to mention we have several local participants on the call today and are available to help answer questions. And that includes Danielle O'Neill from the city of Yukon in Oklahoma, Tina Cole from the Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District, John Henderson from city of Wichita Falls, Texas, Delaney Pruitt with the Panhandle Regional Planning Commission, which is in the Texas Panhandle. And then, of course, Ed Hecker is also on from NHMA and can provide some NHMA perspective. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was a wonderful presentation and just felt like I was learning so much. And thank you for sharing the barriers and some of the ways that you're addressing them. We do have a couple questions coming in. So the first one was through Q&A. So we had a question from Vivian saying, were tribes in Region 6 as a part of multi-jurisdiction or tribal hazard mitigation plans included in your study?
That is a great question. So in this, we didn't purposely exclude them or anything, but we didn't necessarily target them because there are some different requirements and just different nuances that we weren't able to tackle. But we have had tribal participation in other workshops and interactions with SCIP in the past. So we hope that as this study moves on, that we can also, some of it will also influence the tribal requirements and context.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. We also had a question. There was one question about slides being available, and yes, they will be available. We'll post them on our Making Mitigation Work website for after. So those will be there in the next little bit along with the recording. And then we had a question from Nan Johnson who says, there are at least 5,000 to 10,000 planners in this county, many who attend the annual American Planning Association conference. What are your recommendations and thoughts on how FEMA and the mitigation planning program can get these planners to take responsibility to work all these local HMPs, hazard mitigation plans?
Yes, thank you for that question. I have over the years interacted particularly with the Arkansas American Planning Association chapter and the Oklahoma American Planning Association chapter. And then I've tried a little bit with the National APA, haven't had a ton of success. I do know that the National APA, they have I forget the exact name and someone can correct me, but they have kind of a division that is focused on climate planning or hazard related planning. And it does seem like it would be really helpful to have like even an APA, FEMA coordination or collaboration to kind of help push and raise awareness of this. Because as I've found and others have found in other research, that planners and emergency managers really do have a complementary skill sets, and both are really needed to really help advance the long-term disaster risk reduction. So it would be great to get more planners involved in this space and knowledgeable about the hazards and climate change situation.
Thank you. And since we have all your partners here, I wonder if we could just go around really quickly and just hear from you all about just what your experience has been like in this process and any sort of lessons learned for you all or next steps you're excited about.
We gonna jump in first?
Yeah, go ahead, Tina.
I'm always first. Got a lot to say and share, I hope. Actually, Miss Rachel, I had the opportunity to visit with David at Region 6 this morning. I shared with him, I have been given permission by my boss to create a mitigation planners group of the planners that work for the development districts in the state of Arkansas. So we had our first Zoom meeting, and mostly I was just trying to gather information on what they're struggling with. So mostly to reassure me that I'm not crazy and this is just me complaining about everything being crazy. But we all have pretty much the same issues, and it's training and the requirements and guidelines changing so much. Just every year something new, and we're still trying to figure out what you wanted last year. So I'm looking forward to working with my peers in the state of Arkansas, and I love working with Rachel. Her skip tool has been a tremendous help for me, and have high hopes for the template to help, especially new people. 9 times out of 10 when they start, they don't even know how to spell mitigation, and then they say, here, create a plan that expired last month, and you got, oh, by the way, you got 6 more that have expired also. So it's unfortunately, mitigation is not sexy. People aren't looking to get into mitigation. And I think that's sad, because if you do mitigation correctly, you don't even need recovery and response that much, because you've eliminated the problem. But that's my opinion.
Thank you so much, Tina. Yeah, just go ahead, whoever wants to go.
I can add to that. I echo a lot of Tina's sentiments, and a little bit it's felt like a vent session, but it's a productive one, and we're so thankful that Rachel and her team are putting this study together, because coming into this again, I was new to mitigation, and I thought I was the only one struggling. And then I get this email and I join, and I'm like, oh, everyone has these problems. Okay, it's not just me. It's not the 400-page document that I haven't had time to read, and that's my only resource. So I do hope that there is some good change that comes out of this. I'm hopeful for that. I know Rachel can't do that, but I hope that FEMA hears and sees the study, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Delaney.
You'll save me for last. Yeah, I kind of go along with what Delaney and Tina said. It's been a troubling deal, and especially for, when we talk under-resourced, a lot of us are a one-person shop, and the guidance is, like she said, doesn't get down far enough into the weeds. And when you send a plan in on a FEMA template and using their own words, and they tell you it's not qualified as a approved plan, is very discouraging. Not understanding what they want. I've done it 3 times now, and getting the buy-in from the management and the political elected officials is always a difficult process. We do mitigation all the time. Just like Tina said, mitigation is great. We do it all the time. It's just struggling to put it on a piece of paper or a plan that everybody wants to look at. My plan right now is going from 170-page approved plan. The new revised one is over 500 pages. So trying to tell my brand new mayor, this is pretty important. It's 500 pages, good luck, is extremely difficult, even though there's a lot of value to it. So what Rachel's been doing, I've really enjoyed this. It's been really good. Especially getting to meet some of the other people too has been really a good deal. And I hope that a lot of other people take this knowledge and, try to get their plans approved, because you can see down, especially in Texas area, there's a lot of us that don't have approved plans. So it's been really good.
Can I add one more thing? And this is probably my #1 pet peeve with the mitigation process. Is those guidelines, FEMA wants them to be a one-size-fits-all. And you cannot prepare a mitigation plan for a community with a population of 500,000 people and a mitigation plan for a population of a county that the county is less than 7,000 people. Those guidelines just don't fit. It's not a one size fits all. And I'm hoping I'm due to retire in 1 year and 7 months and a few days. If I can live long enough, I want FEMA to understand that it is not a one size fits all. You have to adapt to the community, and that's their focus. This plan has to fit your community. Well, you're making it where it doesn't. But again, that's just my pet peeve with this whole mitigation guidelines and program and stuff. But hopefully over time it'll adjust. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina, for those points. Those are, yeah, Rachel, go ahead if you want to respond to any of that.
Oh, I was just gonna see if Danielle, if you had any comments you wanted to share.
Hi guys, sorry I'm a little under the weather today, so forgive me. Some of the points I can make is one, I've been in municipal government now about 10 years. I'm actually a kind of a different type of planner, if you will. I have always been with meteorology, hazard mitigation, emergency management, and city planning. So I come from a very unique perspective of those worlds, and for years have tried to find a way to mesh them very well. A lot of the points that were already brought up are similar to mine. There is a lot where there seems to be more of a planning focus, but that leaves our emergency managers kind of at a loss, if you will, because what they're most worried about is going to be what is going to happen with the next disaster. How are we going to be able to recover from that? And resiliency and all that is not necessarily on the top priority list for them, especially in Oklahoma, where it seems like every week or so we have something come up. So I think having being in a position where you can kind of mesh those worlds and help connect the dots for some of these people, where it's not just on the emergency managers, it's not just on all of these things, where it is on everybody to help out when they can. And then a lot of education that has to happen, but also remembering that a lot of times your emergency manager or even your planner is wearing multiple hats at one time. So how do you do all of it? It is a matter of trying to find and being able to build a network. And some places they can do that, others they can't. So I feel like one of the next things that I would like to try to do in my own world is to find ways to build those connections and find a way to build that for emergency managers and planners. So I hope that helps. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for adding those thoughts. That was great. Ed, did you have anything you wanted to add? I saw you made a note in the chat.
No, I was just putting a comment in the chat that I see, and we've been talking about this within NHMA. There's a lot of convergence, to use the term that highlights the program NHC, between what NHMA is trying to do to build capacity and build the practice of hazard mitigation planning and practice. And what the comment from APA, we've been talking for a while. We know that APA connects with a large segment across the nation of planners, probably not all of them working in the mitigation arena, or maybe parts of it because it's pretty interdisciplinary, if you will, but really just kind of nailed for me that we need to sit down with our partners, APA, ASFPM, as well as our academic partners with at AC, University of Oklahoma, and others to kind of wrestle with this planning capacity gap, then figure out how we can apply it and make it available to the rural, under-resourced communities that struggle to even get started with this for reasons that have just been articulated.
If I could add another comment, kind of talking about what Ed is thinking, I work for the Planning Commission, which is a regional government organization. We do a lot of planning, and so joining this study has opened my eyes to economic development does hazard mitigation planning and water plannings and floodplain planning. And so we house all of that, or we have committees that do those things under our planning commission umbrella. So that's been one of my goals the last few months, is to reach out to other departments, and we didn't necessarily realize we had crossover. Maybe we're doing double the work. And so I think that's a one way at a local and a regional level, at least in Texas. I don't know what the Council of Governments situation is in other states, but that's a good way to make those connections, I think. So.
Thank you, Delaney. All right, we have maybe time for one last question. This is from Joshua McDuffie, who said, "Hi, thank you for the presentation. Have you identified any trends concerning small fixes or clarifications that can be addressed within a workshop or brief module? For example, would a probability or stats primer for interested community members help with discussing risks related to flood zones?"
Thank you for the question, Joshua. And we haven't gotten to that granularity of, what specifically are kind of pieces that are tripping people up, but I think you're on the right track with, there probably are some, specific kind of little nuggets where something you could explain in 3 minutes versus, a 60-minute module would be the way to go. So I think you're on the right track there, and we just haven't had a chance to get to that level of granularity.
So thanks, Rachel, for answering that. All right, we have a few more minutes here. So maybe that was a quick answer. So maybe we can just go around and have any final thoughts from everyone here today. So if you all just want to go around and take 30 seconds of kind of what you're excited about going forward, let's just do that for the last minute here. We can start with Tina.
Cool. Well, I'm pretty excited about bringing my fellow planners together and sharing this information that I'm getting here. It's just awesome. And just looking forward to the future. I think training's going to be key, and also getting FEMA to listen to the boots on the ground, actually out here with the communities. They're getting better. They're at least, putting underserved communities in the title of their manuals, but I think we still have some work to do. But with groups like Rachel and the mitigation folks that are hosting our meeting today, I think we got a pretty bright future ahead of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Danielle?
I'm just excited about being able to have the boots on the ground voices be heard, be able to work with groups like Rachel's, worked with Skip for a long time, and they're just an amazing group all together, and just really excited about what the future is going to hold for mitigation and planning in general.
Thank you, John.
I'm same as all the rest of everybody. I mean, I think it's really been really helpful for me, especially not doing a lot of this. When you're one person, you spend a lot of time doing a whole bunch of things, and the time dedicated to a mitigation action plan is daunting. So anything that Rachel's been working on and her team has been very beneficial to help speed up some of the process for what we have to go through, especially like what Tina said, with a lot of these, they build it for us, Houston, Dallas, El Paso. But what about us that have less than 100,000, 5,000? We've got counties with more cattle than we've got people, and it's very difficult for them to figure out the process or even how to get started. So it's really been helpful. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
So,
Delaney, final thoughts?
I would just echo what everyone else has said. We're excited to hopefully have a bigger voice in the future.
Thanks. And Rachel?
Yeah, I just appreciate all the participants involved in the study and their input, and it does seem like after a lot of years of tackling different parts of this issue, we're finally getting to really identify where the pinch points are and, ideas for how those can be solved and hopefully make the process more efficient and useful and meaningful for everyone involved.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for being here and having this just incredibly important conversation. Before we close out, I just want to say, in addition to having Rachel here and the many contributions from this outstanding effort, we also want to thank FEMA and the National Science Foundation and the NHMA for making this webinar possible. We're so grateful for you all joining us today and sharing your time and expertise. And just a final recap on the announcements that we have. So remember to contact the Hazard Center if you want to request continuing education credits. And finally, we do have a webinar coming up next month on May 14th. So I hope you will all save the date for that and join us to learn more about what's happening in the world of mitigation, practice, and research. And we hope that you will also subscribe to the Natural Hazard Center website so you can receive notifications about our upcoming webinars and other free resources and information, including signing up for the Natural Hazard Center workshop announcements. So on behalf of the entire Natural Hazard Center team, we want to thank you again, Rachel, and your colleagues and partners for this wonderful presentation today, as well as everyone who joined to listen. So we look forward to seeing you all in May, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Nice meeting you.